Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's Miss Simmons. It's Monday morning. I wanted to continue Mr. Schwartz's review of different themes for each of our units. And so we've clumped together units 1 through 3. Unit 1, remember, is from 1492 until 1607. So that's before the British set up their colonies, but when the Europeans are establishing colonies in North America. Unit 2 is from 1607 to 1754, so that's when the British first set up their established colonies, but before we get into the American Revolutionary time period. And Unit 3 is from the French and Indian War, 1754 through to 1800, which takes us in the pre-revolutionary time period all the way up to the point where Thomas Jefferson is elected president. So it's like the constitutional time period. Each of these reviews is based on theme. This theme is identity. So you can also watch this, but see the identity thing, which has been posted onto Google Classroom as well. So some themes with identity, and what identity is basically how do Americans identify themselves? How do different groups identify themselves? How does that play a role specifically in American history? So getting to one of the first things that's on here, it says American Indians are attempting to keep their identity in the time period for Unit 1, and that lasts both for Period 1 and Period 2. And you guys can think of some specific examples of how Native Americans resist European encroachment. Some great examples of that would be wars that you can see. You have the Powhatan Wars that are happening in Jamestown area, in the area of what's going to be Virginia. You have the Pueblo revolts, which are happening against the Spanish, and that's specifically against the Spanish attempt to convert Native Americans to Christianity, specifically Catholicism. And you also see some wars happening in New England. You have the Pequot Wars and King Philip's Wars, which are examples of Native Americans kind of pushing back against European encroachment. And so they're trying to maintain their own identity, not trying to be absorbed into European culture, not trying to be forced into adapting to European things. If you look down here, the next thing that says is Spanish mission system. And one thing that I think would be helpful for you guys in this colonial time period is to be able to compare and contrast the Spanish and the French and the British and their colonial systems. The Spanish have one kind of thing that they're doing that the French do to an extent, but the Spanish do it more than any other group, and that is trying to convert people to Catholicism. And so they establish a whole mission system. Many of the places in California that you can think of, major cities, are places that have Spanish names, and those Spanish names have some sort of religious context. For instance, Los Angeles or San Francisco or Sacramento, San Diego. A lot of these places in California were originally established as a place where the Spaniards were trying to create a mission to convert Native Americans to Catholicism. And so that's kind of some concrete examples specifically of the Spanish mission system. So the Spanish were here in the Americas to gain wealth, to gain land, but also to spread Catholicism. The French also do that. The French really don't send over as many people as the Spanish do. The French definitely have missionaries that come over. And if you remember back to one of the very first things that we did was we looked at an image of a mission system specifically in Canada, where you have on the St. Lawrence River among the Iroquois this idea that the French are also trying to spread Catholicism. So this isn't unique to the Spanish. It's also something the French are doing. It is not something that the British are going to be doing. The next thing that we see on here is on the bottom. It says 1607 to 1700, Jamestown, what was its identity? So the people coming to Jamestown, they specifically are coming because they want to make money. Jamestown, the business of Jamestown is business. They're there to try to make as much profit for their shareholders. Remember that Jamestown is established by a joint stock company, and that joint stock company is a bunch of investors who've paid a lot of money to send people over to the New World to try to figure out a way to get gold and silver. When that isn't found, ultimately, they're going to adopt tobacco, which is going to make a lot of money. If you go back up to the top where it says 1520 to 1700, part of the identity as the Spanish and the French, but mainly the Spanish, are able to really get headway in forcing people to adopt Catholicism is we see a real mixing as we introduce Africans in via slave labor during this time period. There's a real mixing of cultures, and we see new identities being formed amongst Africans and Native Americans and Europeans in the New World. And that mixing is going to be group of people that are going to be called the Creoles. Creoles means a mix of different influences, whether it's language or ethnicity or religion or culture. And that Creole identity is something that's unique to the Americas because of that mixing of people. Right underneath that, it says 1620 to 1700, New England. What's its identity? You should think back to those Puritans for New England and how that contrasts with Jamestown. If Jamestown's all about business, the Puritans are all about trying to establish the perfect Puritan stronghold in the New World where they're going to create a model community for people who are Puritans. We also see colonies becoming more similar in the British colony sense, but not until 1700 to 1750. In that first time period of British colonization in Unit 2, between 1607 and 1700, we really see a unique settling of each individual of the 13 colonies, and the colonies are set up haphazardly by the British. There's no one single plan, whereas this, getting back to that difference between the Spanish and the French and the British, the Spanish and the French have a very dedicated way of establishing their colonies and what they're going to try to do. The British, each one of those 13 colonies is set up haphazardly and differently. So we see colonies in the British sense becoming more similar to each other in the second century before that they're established before the American Revolution. Another thing that's going to influence the British colonies is both the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. That's on the bottom half of the timeline. The Great Awakening, remember, is a religious revival movement. It is not an intellectual movement. However, it does challenge the established churches, and for that reason, it helps lead to the American Revolution because it's a very egalitarian approach to religion. It's very much a people up as opposed to some authority figure like a pope or the head of the Anglican Church down approach to religion. And because it's a people up approach to religion, that also lends its way to the American Revolution. And the Enlightenment definitely also is going to really impact the lead up to the American Revolution. The Enlightenment specifically is spreading ideas about what's the best type of government. This is a philosophical movement that's starting in Europe and spreading to the Americas. Enlightenment ideas include ideas like the idea of separation of church and state, or separate branches of government that check and balance each other, or freedom of speech and right of assembly. All of those ideas are coming out of the Enlightenment, and that all encourages and helps to develop the people who feel like they're not being represented correctly in under British rule, and helps lead to the American Revolution. So that's part of identity, that we need to create this separate form of government. You can see it also back up on the top, how it helps push us to revolution, and Protestant religious ideas help lead to revolution. Those revolutionary ideas you can see on the timeline when that's really taking hold between 1776, 1789 is not only helping in the American Revolution, but also establishing first our Articles of Confederation and then our Constitution. And honestly, I do not see what it says under 1790, but I will come back to that on another timeline. Thanks, you guys. Talk to you later. Bye bye.